Good morning, everyone. There are only two hard problems in software engineering: doing a successful migration and explaining to your parents what you do for a living. I'm here going to talk about the first. So, I'm Wesley. I'm part of the developer experience track at Booking.com. And on behalf of my team, I'm here today to tell you the story about how we migrated from our self-managed on-prem GitLab instance to GitLab SaaS. But before we go on to this migration adventure together, let me start the timer. I need to explain you some things first. So, Booking.com, we're a very large online travel platform. Booking.com is also my employer. And we're quite an old company. So Booking.com is 30 years old. At the time, Google didn't exist yet. I mean Google the company, not Google the number. The jokes won't get better. Let me also introduce GitLab to you. GitLab is a DevOps platform, and it tries to do everything from your code to your CI/CD, everything before, after, in between. And here are a bunch of things that GitLab can do for you. We at Booking, we're a large company, so we're not going to do all of this. We just use very few features, in fact. We store our source code in GitLab. We use it for code reviews, a merge request. We use CI pipelines, and then we use integrations, which are the APIs and the webhooks, because it turns out that's where duct tape sticks really well. So we duct tape GitLab into all the other tools that we have. Let me give you some numbers. This is what GitLab at Booking looks like. And the most important number for this talk is the number of repositories. We have about 70,000 of them. And let me introduce you to one of them. In fact, the very first one. I call it the Big Rock. And this repository is the home of about 500 services. And the first commit in this repository dates back to 2002. And to put that in perspective, 2002 is 3 years before Git itself was released. Think about that. The first merge request indicates when we started using GitLab, which was in 2017. The size of this repository is 15 gigabytes. It has 5 million commits. And this single repository is cloned every hour about 500 times, most for automation purposes. So what does an architecture look like to support GitLab at this scale? Well, in our case, it's something like this. The takeaway here is actually pretty complex to run GitLab at scale. We have 71 physical servers across 2 data centers. And the file storage, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because it's quite relevant for the story. We're using network file storage for the repository data, except for the Big Rock repository, because for performance reasons, we had to move that to solid-state disks. And we're using something called a distributed replicated block device to avoid a single point of failure. Now, running vanilla GitLab would be boring. So we have some customizations, monkey patches, about a dozen. I'm just going to quickly mention 3 of them. First, we have a firefighting bypass mechanism. So this allows engineers to push changes directly into protected branches in case of emergencies. We have a certificate-based Git access mechanism, allowing engineers to use the same SSH certificates that they use to connect to other infrastructure, to also connect to Git. And this avoids the need for personal access tokens. And we have a change detector. And the change detector is a compliance piece that detects changes or events that are relevant. And we do that by looking directly at the write-ahead logs of the database. All right. Now, there's one more question to answer before we can go on an adventure, which is, why? Why are we doing this? And the reason is GitLab stopped supporting network file storage. And in fact, DRBD was never supported in the first place. And so here we are. at the start of our adventure. And before we take even a single step, we level up, because we just learned a skill. And it's a really important one. Surveyor's eye, mapping the architecture and complexities. Because before you go on any migration adventure, you better make sure first you know where you are. So, which brings me to the start of this story, which is May 2023. We decided to move to GitLab SaaS. We also decided to move the repositories incrementally, because a big bang is really a good idea. We also decided to leave some things behind, inactive repositories, as well as the merge request history for all the repositories. Now, let me talk about moving repositories incrementally. The key thing here is that we need to decouple them. And the coupling between repositories turns out to be mostly in their pipelines, because every pipeline can either trigger a pipeline in another repository, or it can include a pipeline definition again in another repository. And we love this. In fact, this happens dozens of layers deep sometimes. So we need to find a way, we had to find a way to decouple that. And let me show you with an example how we did that. So on the left side, yes, the left side, it's right for me, but we have the old world on-prem, and we have two repositories here, eChocolate and Happiness. And on the right side, we have GitLab SaaS. And the implementation of the pipeline of eChocolate is very simple. It triggers Happiness, as I'm sure you all know. And so the first step here is we sync Happiness to GitLab SaaS. And notice the path changes, because on GitLab SaaS, everything is prefixed with our tenant ID, booking SaaS. And if we would now just move eChocolate, it would break, because it would no longer be able to find Happiness. And so that brings me to the second step. We introduce a CI variable called booking base. And booking base is empty on-prem, but it's set to the tenant ID on SaaS. And we update the pipeline of eChocolate to prefix it with this variable. So on-prem, everything works as before because the variable is empty, but now we can take eChocolate, and we can move it. And because of this variable, it continues to find Happiness, even in the cloud. So the last step, we can also move Happiness to the cloud. And when we do it, we reverse my clicker isn't working. I need to stay close to my laptop, I think. Does it work now? There we go. We reverse the mirror the other way around. And the reason is we want to make sure that whatever repository is still on-prem can also continue to find Happiness. All right, let me also talk about how we decided which repositories to move and which ones to leave behind. And for that, we implemented something we call developer activity. A developer activity is a metric that tells us what percentage of the total developer activity, as in the total developer capacity at booking.com, is spent on each of the repositories. And so we set a target, 99.5% of developer activity. And using this metric, we understood that out of our 70,000 repositories, we actually only had to move 10,000 to reach 99.5% of activity on GitLab SaaS. So moving forward, let's track developer activity on the top right corner to give you an idea where we are in time. Currently 0%. And also let's track the number of repositories, because we know we need to get to the top right corner, 10,000. And let's use the timeline on the bottom to track where we are, and hopefully we'll see the line reach the top right by the end of this talk. So, did we learn something? Did we gain experience? I think we did. And so it's time again to level up. And we learned the skill fleet-footed, decoupling system dependencies to enable incremental execution, as we did with the pipelines. And I have more good news. We level up again. Because through developer activity, we learned the skill library of secrets, leveraging usage activity for triage and prioritization. Bringing us to October. So, we did not have a supported upgrade path, but surely we could still upgrade, right? Or that's what we thought at least. But it turns out we found out the hard way that upgrading broke everything. And so we had to roll back. So we were properly stuck, I would say. Also, we were starting to face more NFS performance issues, and we decided to move 2 more repositories to the RBD, meaning our top 3 repositories in terms of activity were now there. And then also we started solving for the monkey patches that I mentioned earlier. So the firefighting bypass mechanism is something that we implemented with native functionality in GitLab SaaS. We worked with the vendor to implement certificate-based get access, so that's now available in the product for everyone. And that's a huge win from a developer experience perspective and also from a security perspective. And we also implemented a new change detector using the GitLab audit event API, because it turns out GitLab was not entirely comfortable to give us access to the right head logs of the database. So, did we learn something? Almost. Because when we got to April, our bits started to develop personality. And when that happens, you know you're facing data corruptions. Turns out, in a period of about 2 months, almost weekly, we had corruptions in our Git object stores. And so, eventually, we were essentially forced to move everything back to network file storage. And this brought performance down far below what was acceptable, considered acceptable. A git push, an empty git push would take a minute. And if you'd go to the UI repository page for these repositories, they would time out. So we were in a really bad position. And so we had to relook at the whole migration plan. So far, the idea was we work our way up, starting at the simple repositories up to the big rock as we gain confidence, experience, and trust. But we had to flip the plan, and we had to start with the big rock as our very first repository. So what happened next? Remember the webhooks where the duct tape sticked? Well, for the webhooks at GitLab SaaS to reach our internal systems, we had to build this webhook proxy. That's one thing we did. Then also we started building out a runbook for the actual migration of the big rock. So this consists of many steps, every step with a script, every script with a rollback script, and we tested all of that up to the point we were comfortable that this was going to work. We also had to re-implement all our compliance controls for GitLab SaaS and get those validated with auditors. And we started working on communication. And one thing we did is we implemented a redirect banner. And this informed people that their repository now lives on GitLab SaaS. And this was quite important because we have still today 10,000 of links pointing to the old world scattered across all our systems. And this avoids breaking all of those. So, time to level up. As we learn Titan's grip, tackling the most impactful complex first to build confidence and trust, as we stumbled upon and with the big rock. Bringing us to November. We take our runbook of 49 steps and we execute on it. And we're able to move our big rock to GitLab SaaS, meaning with a single repository, we now have 10% of our developer activity already on GitLab SaaS. We booked a war room for a week and we canceled it on day 2. Everything went really smooth. So this was a very big win for the team. But we didn't have a lot of time to celebrate because we were stuck on a version of GitLab that started to accumulate security vulnerabilities. But it wasn't just the application, it's also the database that went end of life, and then also the version of the operating system. And so it's at that point that security became quite opinionated about the timelines of this whole thing, and essentially told us, you need to finish this by end of 2025. So, based on the success of our big rock, we decided to continue migrating the repositories with the most activity first, and we decided to use something that we call migration waves. And it looks like this. The red box is where we migrate a bunch of repositories, the ones with the most activity. Then the green box is where we fix whatever we broke for people. It's aftercare. And then, once everything's settled, we sat together with the team and did a retrospective to decide what now do we need to continue and improve and further automate to be ready for the next migration wave. And so the next wave would contain more repositories, and the time in between waves became smaller as we gave ourselves less and less time in the yellow box. So, as we were going through this process, we ended up converting our runbook into a CLI. And so, it's time again to level up as we learn a new skill. Rally the troops, organizing the move into waves to manage momentum and build and manage risks. Bringing us to April last year. We now have the runbook fully automated, and things start to change a bit. Up till now, we were mostly focused on moving complex, big repositories, but now the problem starts to become a problem of scale. How do we scale this up to tens and hundreds of repositories at the same time? And so what happened next is we continued to further evolve the migration CLI, and it ended up becoming an API. And so we level up again. We learned shadow clone. As we went from this runbook to a CLI to an API, we were shifting from manual focus to automated tools. So bringing us to June. We had 45% of developer activity on GitLab SaaS, which we were pretty pleased with. But if we look at it in terms of repositories, we can see this orange dot has only just left the 0. We're only at 750 repositories out of 10,000, and we're over 2 years in, and we have just 5 months left to complete this whole thing. But even worse, it's summertime. This is the time where a lot of people in the world enjoy their holidays, go to their hotels, drink cocktails on the beach, and we, being Booking.com, enable this. So this is the worst time for me and my team to disrupt product teams with the migration of their code repositories. And so we decided to stop. What we were doing was not going to get us to the finish line, and so we took a big gamble. We said, let's stop migrating and instead focus on building out self-migration tooling. So what happened next is we built a UI where people could trigger migrations, where they could track the progress. We built, the API that we already had became the backend of this UI, and it needed to handle concurrency, authentication, authorization. And I think you can guess what's going to happen next. We level up because we learn a new skill, inspiration, pivoting from migrating for the user to enabling self-service. Bringing us to August. At this point, we have 1,000 repositories on GitLab SaaS with 3 months left to get to 10,000. And we launch our self-service migration tool. And we continue to add features such as bulk migration. And we double down on communication. And we use emails as well as banners in the application to encourage people to self-migrate. We also use Slack to send automated messages to inform people about the ongoing migrations of their repos. And then magic started to happen because people really liked the tooling that we gave them. And so, going to November, we made it. We managed to get 99.6% of our developer activity onto GitLab SaaS. And if you look at the graph, the big yellow area there are all the repositories that people self-migrated. So we had one final trick up our sleeves. We turned GitLab on-prem into read-only mode. And because we're tracking this migration using developer activity, that essentially cut off the long tail. Because all the activity was forced onto GitLab SaaS. And so, for the final time, we level up. And we learn the skill final smash, using hard technical stops to beat the long tail. And this is the story of how we managed to migrate all our code repositories from GitLab on-prem to GitLab SaaS, bringing me to the final chapter of my talk, the epilogue. So, where are we today? We still have GitLab on-prem around, but it's simplified. It's no longer 71 boxes. In fact, it's just 4 now, and they're fully upgraded. We have further restricted the access, meaning API access is blocked, Git access is blocked, and it's just there to allow people to access their merge request history. Self-migration also is still possible. And you can see in the graph on the background how we had almost 6,000 self-migrations in October last year. And this month we have about 1 per day. And we'll continue to monitor this, and over time we'll entirely sunset GitLab on-prem. And we hope to do that by the end of this year. So, these are the 8 skills that we learned. 8 key ideas which made this migration a success. And now that you learned about them, you can also apply them to your next migration adventure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wesley. Brilliant. Absolutely. Questions for Wesley?